Dear congregation, it is April 25th, 2022, and here is another letter for the week for some things for us to think about. Uh, Christ is risen. He is risen indeed every day. Sometimes I think God's call on, or God's calls on our lives are sudden and dramatic. Well, just consider the story of Paul in the book of Acts. Sometimes it feels more like a long, blustering journey, though. A lot of twists and turns and setbacks, kind of like in the case of Peter. And for many of us, it might be difficult to know who God is calling us to be. The ways God calls us is by inviting us to listen to our innermost desires. It has been said that we find our call where our greatest joy is and where the greatest need is. And where those two intersect, that is our call. We listen to our innermost desires, though. The most fundamental vocation is to become the person whom God created. And it's both the person you already are and the person that God is calling you to be. Because everyone has a vocation. It bears repeating. The most fundamental vocation is to become the person whom God created. And it's both the person you already are and the person that God calls you to be. We look at ourselves now, God's calling us now, and where do we feel God is calling us to? We find that throughout our desires, what moves us, what touches us, what are we drawn to? And part of that is career, but only part of it. I mean, it's really who you are called to be. And that's why that question really speaks to me. Who has God called you to be? How do we discern our vocation? A vocation is the deepest identity we have. And as well being called to say married life, or being a lawyer, or being a teacher, being a farmer. Those are calls in our life, the place where we get the joy. And I know sometimes there isn't always 100% joy, sometimes not. But at the end of the day, I think that's where we find our joy. Martin Luther said, being a parent is a vocation, the greatest vocation given to us. And for that matter, being grandparents, being aunts and uncles, being guiding forces. Parenthood, Luther says, is the greatest vocation God gives to us. And I believe that your deepest desires, the things that you're drawn to, the person you're called to be, are really God's desires for you. I mean, how else would God call us into something but to go from where our desires are? You know, you would think of a married couple, and that's the easiest example I can think of. You know, they are drawn together. And it's the same in different jobs. It's the same in religious vocations, but it's also the same in the person you desire to be. I think we all have an image of the person we want to become. And I think it's more, well, I say maybe less selfish. We'd like to think of ourselves and our lives as having and being productive. What is the person you want to become? More loving, more open, more free. That's a call. And it's helping people understand that and recognizing it, that in a way that to tell them it's not selfish to have desires for yourself. Desire ultimately is not selfishness. Because sometimes there is heartaches with that. But let me talk about that, not being selfish. When we feel we are being called by God to something and being totally honest about it, it's not being selfish, because if we are going after what God has called us to, it is about, well, as you know, God's desire is for all of humanity, of all of creation. And if our call draws us to be productive and be supportive of those things in the life, that's a good place. But sometimes our call can be a heartache for us. We have to let go of the things that we are not called to be and the parts of our lives that are keeping us back. This is God calling you. You know that? It's a process. And it's ultimately liberating when we finally resign ourselves or give ourselves to what God is calling us to, even though we must leave some things behind. But that idea that we go after our desires, we find the place where need and our joy meet, and that becomes very liberating. And that is the wonderful message of Christ: liberation and freedom. Let's let you think on that this week. Where is God calling you to? Who has God called you to be now? And what is God calling you to be in the future? As always, know that I hold all of you in constant prayer, trusting in God's grace for all of us, wherever that call, whatever that grace might find us. I send this out with great love, and in Christ's name, Pastor Kent.